You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. It's time now to see what's making the headlines with the political journalist and broadcaster, Theo Usherwood, and the political correspondent for PoliticsJOE Ava-Santina Evans. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Leading the Daily Mail tomorrow, Nicola Sturgeon's husband charged over SNP cash probe. The Guardian are reporting on their front page that the state could be left with £15 billion of debt by the nationalisation of Thames Water. The Metro has the story of the MP Mark Menzies, who's lost the Conservative whip over allegations he misused campaign funds, something he denies. In The Times, Sunak vows crackdown on what he calls the culture of sick note. The Telegraph has that same story, as does The Express, which says the Prime Minister has told Sick Note Britain to get a grip and a job. The Financial Times reports on the government ordering port authorities to implement post-Brexit health and safety checks on EU imports using a phased approach rather than all at once. Meanwhile, according to The Eye, the EU is poised to offer a possible future Labour government a diplomatic olive branch by giving UK students under the age of 30 the option of studying in EU countries for up to 4 years. And The Star suggests the popularity of the full English breakfast is no more. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Theo Usherwood and Ava-Santina Evans. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Daily Mail, a story that's in many of the newspapers, and this is the fact that Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, has been charged over the alleged embezzlement of SNP funds. Theo.
Obviously, criminal proceedings now active, and we can't begin to talk about the implications for the criminal process, if you will. But there are going to be political ramifications for this. Remember, earlier this month, for the first time, Labour took a lead in Scotland, 33 points to 31, over the SNP. That's the first time they've held a lead in more than a decade. And of course, there will be, we don't yet know whether this trial is going to take place before or after a general election and whether the fallout will become public knowledge. But it will be difficult for the SNP to manage this and head into a general election where they are fighting to maintain that lead that they have. They've held, the dominance that they've held in Scottish politics now for more than 10 years. So it is a major development in this story, not just for Mr Murrell, of course, Nicola Sturgeon, but also for politics, with the political landscape in Scotland.
And Ava, public knowledge of this is bound to have political impact, isn't it?
Yeah, but, you know, this could actually be seen as a good day for someone like Humza Yousaf because, you know, today Scotland announced that they were going to, the SNP announced that they were going to renege on their climate promises. They were going to move their net zero targets away from 2030, which would have been politically, you know, pretty climactic for the First Minister. So actually, for this to be sort of shroud all of those headlines, and now potentially you might be able to blame this on the old regime and not actually to do with the new SNP that will be incoming again at the general election, could be quite beneficial for him.
Interesting viewpoint that I've not heard today, actually. Let's have a look at the Financial Times, and this is the nuclear threat from Iran. Previously, that state saying that their nuclear capability was for peaceful ends, but there is an about turn because of recent events, they're suggesting.
Yes, Iran, the FT is reporting, has warned Israel it could review its nuclear stance if its atomic facilities are threatened. And of course, this is what the White House and global leaders do not want to see, this escalation of tensions between Iran and Israel. Reports also that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be, in effect, given the green light by Joe Biden and his national security team to go ahead with the Rafah offensive in return for not retaliating against those drone attacks and missile attacks from Israel over the last weekend. So tensions on a knife edge, proverbial knife edge, in that region, and there is a threat that if Israel goes back in, or a warning from Iran that if Israel goes back in, then we're going to see the conflict escalate further.
Do you think, Ava, that we're seeing now a sort of descaling of or de-escalation of the potential of a retaliatory strike because Iran are saying that, they will deploy nuclear weapons potentially, but America is possibly going to offer Rafah, an invasion of Rafah, to stop Israel retaliating?
I mean, it's very concerning for anyone who lives on the Gaza Strip. I mean, you've got already 34,000 people dead on the Strip. And, that sort of bargaining is not going to offer anyone any comfort, is it? It's extremely concerning. But look, so we've got renewed calls today. Mike Johnson, who is the Republican Speaker of the House, is speaking today about Ukraine and how America desperately needs to arm Ukraine and send bullets over. He doesn't want to see any American boys being sent over. When you're looking at the entire region, the entire area, and you're thinking about potential ramping up of tensions, that same rhetoric needs to be thought about. You don't want to ever have to send troops over into the Middle East, and if you continue to allow Iran and Israel to ramp up tensions, that's going to be the inevitable fallout.
And Theo, how do the decisions of the US and the UK announcing new sanctions on Iran's drone programme, how does that play into the entire situation?
It's interesting, isn't it, that the US and UK have seen somewhat as an outlier, and also amongst the rest of the global community. We've also got reports with the UN, and I know Sky's been reporting on it, are going to be looking at recognition of the Palestinian state. And will that?
Which
of course the United States are going to block. They have vetoed it now. Well, is the UK? Where does that? Is it going to be now increasingly the case that we actually see the United States and the UK much more isolated in their support for Israel, alongside, against, or paradoxically against the rest of the international community?
And we know that the UK was one of 2 countries that abstained in that vote, which is quite interesting. How do you read that, Ava?
Well, I mean, it's rather extraordinary when you think about the polling about Palestine up and down the country, and you wonder if, the views of the country, which tend to swing very high towards a ceasefire, are actually being reflected in our foreign policy.
Let us move on to... we're going to have a look at our Prime Minister's decision to have a look at the sick note, suggesting that perhaps it shouldn't be prescribed by GPs and there should be specialist workers who are versed in health and safety at work and people's mental health, etc., that they should be given the sick notes and that they're used far too often, essentially.
I think what the Prime Minister is alluding to in this speech that we're expecting to hear tomorrow is that it's far too easy for people, this is the Prime Minister's opinion, the Conservatives' opinion, to get their sick note and get signed off from work by just simply going to their GP. They might have a relationship with their GP, and the GP, the argument is going to be too busy to go through all of the details and simply sign the note. Well, it's now called a fit to work note, isn't it?
Yes.
We've already had that change, allowing somebody to take time off work, and we're seeing the welfare bill increase exponentially, and the Prime Minister is trying to get around this. What he's saying now is he wants to, in effect, outsource that task of signing fit-to-work notes to specialists. But we don't actually know whether those specialists have medical degrees.
No, that wasn't clear.
And that's unclear. And you could end up in a situation where somebody is saying, actually, with my medical degree, a GP would say, with my medical degree, I can tell you that you're not fit to work because of your mental state or an injury you might have suffered. And then you're going up against somebody who says that you are fit to work, but they don't actually have the clinical background. And I would expect, and there was one line in, I think it was in the front of the Telegraph, saying, the government want to test this. They know they're on shaky ground. I'd imagine this would be open very quickly to legal challenge, where you're putting somebody's opinion saying you are fit to work who doesn't have a clinical background against somebody else's opinion who does have a clinical medical degree saying actually you're not fit to work. And we'll see legal challenges if this were to go ahead, I'd imagine, quite quickly.
I think you're probably right. The Guardian suggesting that the Prime Minister is warning that there is a risk of over-medicalising normal worries by diagnosing them as mental health conditions.
Well, I mean, both parties have identified that we have a crisis in this country, and that crisis is that there is, yes, a lot of economic activity because people are being signed off of work because of mental health issues. But what neither party have done is try to come up with some sort of constructive way of tackling that. You know, we have heard from Labour that they're going to put a mental health specialist in every school, and they would like mental health hubs to be more widely available. But what Sunak's doing today is he's diagnosing the problem but not actually providing any sort of solution. So, you know, if these specialists decide that someone is fit to work, how are you going to make them go to work? You can't exactly drag them into the workplace and demand that they start typing at a computer.
Yeah, the problem is real, though. I mean, when we look at the stats, total number of people signed off soared to a record 11 million last year, and it was 5.3 million in 2015-16.
But this is symptomatic of the problems facing so many people in this country in terms of the stresses of their work, of being able to go to work, of their mental state. This has been a problem, as you rightly say, Gillian, that has been going on now for some years. And the government's answer up until this point is, in effect, to try and find a cost-neutral way of dealing with it, i.e. it's not going to cost a huge amount of money just to get somebody else, apart from a GP, to sign the forms to say whether somebody's fit to work, rather than actually trying to get to the nub of the problem as to why people are not well enough to go to work, or why people don't feel in a mental state to be able to go to work and do their jobs and live healthy lives in contributing to the economy. And that's something that the government, up until now, hasn't really got to grips with, and it's going to be a challenge for Keir Starmer.
And there does seem to be a suggestion that people are abusing the system, as it were, Ava, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that sometimes that might be a sort of easy get-out that governments like to use, rather than actually have to fund a system that will, you know, see an improvement. I mean, you think about a lot of mental health specialists. Actually, Rosanna Allen-Khan, who used to be on the shadow Labour front bench but is now a backbencher, she speaks often about this sort of need to put people who come in to GPs for medical assistance with their mental health straight onto medication. It's sort of the Americanisation of our mental health offering in this country, and it's because we simply don't have the provision to send people to therapy. If you're in a situation where you're in an emergency, you will get help, and the NHS is very good at dealing with emergencies. But if you're someone who simply can't cope, then we might not have the facilities to make you better.
Yeah, interesting point. Ava and Theo, thank you very much for the moment. We are going to take a break. Coming up, what might be the political fallout from the allegations surrounding the MP Mark Menzies, who's lost the Conservative whip? We'll discuss that and more next. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Theo Usherwood and Ava-Santina Evans. Let's have a look at the front page of the Metro now, shall we? And this story of the Conservative politician who has lost the whip, Mark Menzies. He's claimed that he phoned an aide at 3:15 a.m. saying he was locked in a flat by bad people while drinking and needed £5,000 to be freed. Theo.
It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? He's reported to have called his 78-year-old former campaign manager in the early hours, asking her, "Are you on your own? I've got in with some bad people and they've got me locked in a flat and they want £5,000 to release me." The money was to come from a bank account, the Metro is reporting, and of course this was a story first reported in the Times containing donations to his campaign fund. But of course the aide pointed out that actually it was 3:15 in the morning and she couldn't get the transfer without leaving the house. But this is another one of those stories for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. We're now up to 18 independent MPs, the majority of them Conservatives, for various wrongdoings and misdemeanours. And if we're going to have an October election, how many more are there going to be? How many more headlines? He's now lost the whip. Simon Hart's, the Chief Whip's, intervened and suspended the whip from Mr Pawsey. Not yet clear whether we're going to end up with a by-election or a recall petition and then a by-election. He is in a relatively safe constituency and filed in Lancashire. I think his majority is something like 16,000 over Labour. So the Conservatives, things are dire for the Conservative Party, but they would hope to at least try and retain that seat if there was to be a by-election.
Ava, we should just say that Mark Menzies has denied all of the allegations against him, but Labour are calling for a police investigation to whether he did misuse campaign funds.
Yeah, Labour are questioning that whether there's any criminality here. I think it's because the sort of number of funds that were being laid out by the Times yesterday. I mean, there was one charge for £14,000. He wanted another £35,000, to which he was apparently told that there was no money left. There just seems to be sort of a veritable number of different amounts of money that he was looking to get out of this campaign fund that eventually dried up. And a lot of it seems to be to do with medical bills, which is quite confusing if you think about you don't really need to pay for medical medicine in this country. So it seems the whole thing seems totally bizarre.
Private cover.
But, you know, why would you go private if you don't have the cash to back it up? It just seems totally bizarre to me. But, yeah, so, you know, looking ahead to a possible by-election, I think actually this would be quite frustrating for Labour because, you know, at this point it's sort of like just call the general election because parties are having to spend a fortune on campaigning and, you know, they would quite like to reserve all of those funds to put together a proper campaign for the general election.
To the eye, Theo, tell us how the EU are offering olive branch.
This is for 18 to 30-year-olds, and it would the plans being drawn up by the Commission would in effect allow anybody in the UK between 18 and 30 to travel to a singular European country and study and travel and work in that country for up to 4 years. It would, however, be a reciprocal arrangement, and those in the EU in the same age bracket would be expected to be allowed to come to the UK under the same arrangements. But you wouldn't be, if you were a British student, you wouldn't be able to go to the European Union and then travel around the European Union. You have to go to one particular country. Labour, this is seen as potentially an olive branch to be offered to Labour. Labour is saying, well, it's a sort of denial, saying they don't have any plans. But nobody's talking about Labour having any plans. This is a European Commission plan, and it remains to be seen whether Labour would bite at the chance, especially, and I think the politics of this would be Labour would be looking, you know, Keir Starmer, whether he can do it or not, would be looking to try and win over younger voters in the same way that Jeremy Corbyn was able to do particularly in 2017, by saying actually this is something that he would go for.
Do you think this is plausible, Ava?
Well, I think it's going to be very frustrating if you're aged between 30 and 35 because I think, you know, you've just missed out and you sort of had, you know, you've had 2 recessions in your lifetime, student loans, and now you can't travel to Europe. You know, you're having the worst of all worlds here. But look, you know, this is not something I can imagine that Keir Starmer would commit to before a general election. I think, you know, I understand what you're talking about trying to recoup the youth vote, but I actually think he's so desperate to sort of move himself away for himself as the shadow Brexit secretary and move himself away as, you know, sort of all of the derogatory names that Rishi Sunak gives him about being too friendly with Europe. I can't see him committing to it.